would I do that? That was pretty much a no-brainer, and thank you for playing along. Who among us doesn't remember listening to that song at some point in our lives and dreaming of a world where everything was A-okay and friendly neighbors were all that you would meet? I know that I spent many hours of my childhood, I don't really want to think about how many, but many hours of my childhood, and now my children's childhood, traveling to the world of Sesame Street. And I am tempted to tell you that today's reflections are brought to you by the letter K and the number 5. Since November 10th of 1969, children of all ages have been watching Ernie drive Bert crazy. Bert put up with him. Cookie Monster overindulge on the sweet stuff. Oscar being his grouchy, gruff, trash-loving self. And if you haven't watched recently with your own children or grandchildren or just for your own amusement because it's fun, you will be relieved to know that all of these things are still true. Some of our beloved friends are gone. Mr. Hooper still holds a very special place in my heart. Others are older, but still there. Gordon and Susan, Maria and Louise, Bob, and new friends have joined, Elmo and Abby Cadabby, Zoe and Rosita. Now the first lines of that very first episode in 1969 were delivered by Gordon when he exclaimed, "You've never seen a street like Sesame Street. Everything happens here. You're gonna love it." And those words have set the tone for the past 44 years. In 2009, on the 40th anniversary of the beginning of Sesame Street, Lisa Gunther wrote these words in a Newsweek cover article. "It is arguably the most important children's program in the history of television. No show has affected the way we think about education, parenting, childhood development, cultural diversity, both in the United States and abroad, more than Big Bird and his friends. You might even say that Sesame Street changed the world one letter at a time. Don't believe me? Then let's imagine where we'd be if Sesame Street never existed. For one thing, television itself might be a vast wasteland. That was the phrase the FCC chairman Newton Minow used to describe the TV landscape in 1961. Children's TV was not exempt. The show came about after Lloyd Morissette, an experimental psychologist, walked into his living room and found his 3-year-old daughter mesmerized by the TV test pattern. He told that story at a dinner party several weeks later and wondered aloud if children might be able to learn something from the boob tube. It seems like a crazy question in our world of baby Einstein. But back then, to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, we didn't know what we didn't know. When Sesame Street arrived, scientists were just discovering that our brains were not fully formed at birth and could be affected by early experiences. Head Start began in 1965, in part out of that revelation. Educators were virtually ignoring the intellect of preschool children, says Joan Gans Cooney, who threw that dinner party and has been with the show, the visionary of it since the beginning. Children would eat up the ABCs before kindergarten, she believed, especially if a wacky puppet ate up alphabet-shaped cookies right along with them. The Department of Education was skeptical. Captain Kangaroo and Mr. Rogers, though age-appropriate, had not become must-see TV. Bozo and Romper Room. Do you remember Romper Room? Which ended with the hostess pretending that she could see children at home through a magic mirror, which was obviously fake. Remember? I see Lorna. I see Teresa. She never said my name. I haven't gotten over it. But things like Romper Room and Bozo were kind of dumbed down fun. But the government, although they were skeptical, agreed to contribute half of the original $8 million budget to launch Sesame Street. And the results were pretty immediate. The first season in 1969 set out to teach children to count from 1 to 10. But it became clear that kids as young as 2 could make it to 20. And the show now gets into the hundreds, counting by tens. That first year also yielded 3 Emmys, a Peabody Award, a front-page rave from the New York Times, and one especially noteworthy piece of fan mail that read like this. The many children and families now benefiting from Sesame Street are participants in one of the most promising experiments in the history of that medium. The Children's Television Workshop certainly deserves the high praise it's been getting from young and old alike in every corner of the nation. This administration is enthusiastically committed to opening up opportunities for every youngster, particularly during his first 5 years of life, and is pleased to be among the sponsors of your distinguished program. Sincerely, Richard Nixon. The educational advances that Sesame Street brought to television are hard to question, but perhaps the most radical part of that experiment was and is its social activism. From the start, it targeted lower-income urban kids, the ones who lived on streets with garbage cans sitting in front of their apartments. The show arrived on the heels of riots in Washington, Baltimore, Cleveland, and Chicago, and the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Chester Pierce, a Harvard professor who founded the Black Psychiatrists of America, was one of the show's original advisors, and he was acutely aware of the racism his 3-year-old daughter would face in that hostile time. It was intentional from the beginning to show different races living together. They were very conscious of the modeling that kids and parents would take away from that. In 1969, it was still a radical notion in some corners of the country. Here was a TV show putting African Americans on a level playing field with white characters, showing them as equals. An integrated program aimed at impressionable children was a bit too much for the good people of Mississippi. The state's Commission for Educational Television banned the show in May of 1970. Joan Gans Cooney called it a tragedy for all the children of Mississippi, and news reports saw her outrage and raised it. The state finally reversed itself 22 days later. When you think about what the world might have looked like without Sesame, you can't dismiss the impact of putting Gordon and Susan into America's living rooms. I like to think, Cooney says, that we had something to do with what has happened in the White House. There's a part of me that thinks he wouldn't have been there without us. It was a classic early Sesame Street moment when Jesse Jackson appeared on the screen in 1971 to recite the verses of the poem, I Am Somebody, with children of all colors repeating the phrases after him. I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody. I may be yellow, but I am somebody. I may be on welfare, but I am somebody. I may be small, but I am somebody. I may make a mistake, but I am somebody. My clothes are different. My face is different. My hair is different. But I am somebody. I am black, brown, white. I speak a different language, but I must be respected, protected, never rejected. I am God's child. I am somebody. What a radical message then, and unfortunately in many ways a still radical message today. We are all somebody. For children like myself, who grew up in a home in which this message was not preached, a place in which the prevailing message was one of difference, of superiority and inferiority, of separateness, a message of anger and even at times hatred. This message, that we are all somebody, gave us a new roadmap, a new message to hold in our hearts, knowing that the world was not as we saw each day and could, in fact, be different. Sesame Street gave me a map and a dream of a different world. A world built on cooperation, on friendship, on curiosity, a place where all of your emotions were welcome. A place where you could say, I'm sorry, and be forgiven. A place for starting over, a place where all belonged. That was and is the beauty of it for me. Sesame Street was my rabbit-duck illusion. It allowed me to see things differently, to recognize that the view of the world that I was seeing in 1979 Scranton, Pennsylvania was not all there was. That the ideas and beliefs that were being handed to me could be received and reviewed and rejected. That there was more than one way to see people, more than one way to have relationships, to talk with each other, more than one narrow prescribed way to be in the world. That people who were different were not bad, not wrong, not objects to be avoided and feared, but potential friends and neighbors. Potential. That's what it is. It's potential. For things to be different, for there to be change, for us to create a different world. I know that many of us say that we came here to this Unitarian Universalist community because we want things to change. We want true equality. We want peace and justice. We want a world that honors all children's inherent worth, that honors their search, that affirms that they can be and do and create beauty. We want a healthy planet on which they can grow. These are not simple wants. These are not easy demands. We need to fight against the isms of our world: racism, sexism, ageism, consumerism. Creating the world of which we dream takes a great deal of energy, of creativity, of hope, some despair, a great deal of time and money and struggle. I grew up in a time and a place and with a people that would say, why bother? If I were to go home now and tell them the things I am saying to you, they would tell me that it's impossible, that it's too far gone, or they would say that things are going just fine. They would tell me that the world has different classes of people and that if you were wise, you would stay with your own kind. And I am here with you because I know that humankind is my kind, that all life is my kind, that there are no distinctions from on high. The only distinctions are the ones that we have made. And if we have made them, then we can unmake them. And it's up to us. And it's what I learned on Sesame Street. As a small child in a fractured world full of messages of despair and pain, Sesame Street brought me hope. Big Bird asked questions that I wanted to know the answers to, and I was too afraid to ask. He asked questions that I didn't know how to ask, and we learned together. Ernie taught me that it's okay to be silly or at times even absurd. Bert let me know that it's okay to want to have quiet time and be serious, to contemplate the weightier things, and sometimes you just need to do the pigeon. And Oscar taught me that it's okay to be a grouch, that there are times when you just want to be miserable and tell the world to scram, to beat it, to leave me alone. All of these together helped me as a small child to see the complexity in our world and in ourselves, and helped me to start make sense of who I am, where I want to go in the world that I want to create. Oftentimes, people will ask after hearing about my upbringing, where did you come from? And how did you end up here? And I think the next time I get that question, I'm going to say, I ended up here because of Sesame Street. I know, it's still television. It still works with a 3 to 4 minute attention span. It has spawned video games, stuffed animals, a whole world of things to buy. But in a world of less than stellar children's programming, or as we say in our house, yes, honey, it's a cartoon, but it's inappropriate for children, Sesame Street is still trying. They have recently created toolkits on divorce, death, bullying, healthy eating, what to do in a hurricane, children around the world, and most recently, incarcerated parents. In a country like ours, where 1 in 28 children have a parent in the prison system, 1 in 28, they're giving us the tools to help. They've introduced Alex, who is this sweet little Muppet who wears a little gray hoodie, and he's got bright blue hair, and his father is incarcerated. And through Alex, they're allowing children with incarcerated parents to talk about it, to talk about their feelings openly and honestly about how much they miss their parent, about their fears and their worries, their sadness and grief. Jim Henson once said, I know that it's easier to portray a world that's filled with cynicism and anger, where problems are solved with violence. That's titillating. It's an easy way out. What's a whole lot tougher is to offer alternatives, to present other ways conflicts can be resolved, and to show that you can have a positive impact on your world. To do that, you have to put yourself out on a limb, take chances, and run the risk of being a do-gooder. I think that's what we're trying to do here. Offer alternatives, look for different ways of seeing things, of being together, of creating community. It's radical, and some would say that it's anarchy. At times it does feel a bit like anarchy, but it's an anarchy that celebrates and creates rather than destroys. Jerry Jewell, who was a longtime puppeteer and a friend of Jim Henson, said this about him. Jim wanted to make a difference. He was brave enough to be able to say, I want to do a show that brings peace to the world, and I want us all to sit down and talk about it. He knew that television shows do not bring peace to the world, but he was not so cynical as to say we can't think about it. There was a kind of idealism there that could seem naive and childlike, but that didn't mean it couldn't come true. Are we brave enough to say we want to create communities that bring peace to the world? Does it sound crazy? Well, let's sit down and talk about it. Just because we can't imagine it doesn't mean it can't come true, and it doesn't mean that we aren't the ones to do it. If our message is anything, then it's a message that resonates with Sesame Street. That life is basically good. That people are basically good. That together we can turn this around and create a world full of sunny days, friendly neighbors, dreams and visions where anything is possible. So I'll leave you today with these words from one of the wisest ones that I know, Kermit the Frog. Life's like a movie. Write your own ending. Keep believing, keep pretending. We've done just what we set out to do, thanks to the lovers, the dreamers, and you.